Ravens are getting a key member of their offense back, while the Saints passing game has multiple players in the news. I'm Joe Dolan, and this is the Fantasy Points Daily Lineup for Tuesday, August 9th, 2022.
It's time for the FantasyPoints.com Daily Lineup. Staying on top of the latest news and updates around the NFL. Rise and shine, folks. We're taking the field. Here's your host, FantasyPoints.com's Joe Dolan.
Starting at quarterback today, it's the Saints' Jameis Winston. Now, Winston left practice on Monday with what was initially called a rolled ankle. However, Coach Dennis Allen told reporters that he tweaked his foot and is getting more tests. Now, to my untrained ears, a foot injury sounds more ominous than a simple rolled ankle, though Nick Underhill of New Orleans Football, who's basically the most plugged-in Saints reporter there is, tweeted on Monday night that, per multiple sources, the Jameis Winston injury isn't anything major. If Winston were to miss time, Andy Dalton was signed to be his backup, though you do wonder if the Saints would put an end to the Taysom Hill tight end experiment, which continues to make Taysom Hill a pretty appealing last-round tight end 3 in best ball drafts. At our first running back spot is someone returning to the field this week, JK Dobbins of the Baltimore Ravens. Dobbins has passed his physical and has been removed from the PUP list, which is great news given his injury last August. Now, according to Jeff Zrebiec of The Athletic, if there are no setbacks, there's plenty of time for him to ramp up and play week 1. So reading the tea leaves based on that, Dobbins is not yet 100%, but he's back in practicing in a backfield competition that OC Greg Roman, offensive coordinator Greg Roman, of course, described as, quote, wide open last week. It is accepted that Dobbins' knee injury was far more severe than a simple torn ACL, which has complicated his recovery. Our Dr. Edwin Porras said it might be fairer to expect Dobbins to be around 85% of his former self in the early going. But to me, and probably to most fantasy players, even 85% of Dobbins would be far better than whatever version of Mike Davis the Ravens could throw out there at this point. Meanwhile, rookie Tyler Beatty is more of a scat back type. On account of the fact that Dobbins is off the PUP list and Gus Edwards is not, Dobbins is far more likely at this point to be ready at the start of the season than is Edwards. Dobbins currently carries a 6th round ADP on Underdog, but that's likely to rise as we progress throughout August. At our other running back spot is someone who would prefer to be somewhere else. The Browns' vibes are bad right now for obvious reasons, and their major strength on offense, the backfield, is no exception. Kareem Hunt, the best number 2 running back in the NFL, has requested a trade out of Cleveland per Mary Kay Cabot of the Cleveland Plain Dealer because the Browns do not seem to be willing to acquiesce to his demands for a new contract. Now, of course, they apparently also are not willing to acquiesce to his trade demands as they likely won't get something commensurate to his value. Now, this was, of course, always a possibility. Hunt is in a contract year and is one of the NFL's most complete backs, but the Browns already have Nick Chubb on a $37 million deal, and it was highly unlikely they'd pay a second running back a big contract, given they just spent $230 million on a quarterback who may or may not play for them. It's a situation that must be monitored because if Hunt is traded, that's good for his fantasy value, depending on where he lands, and it's also good for Nick Chubb's fantasy value. But if Kareem Hunt stays, there's a chance he chooses not to play at all. Now, that would be good for Chubb, but also for Dearness Johnson or rookie Jerome Ford. Hunt is highly volatile at his RB32 ADP on Underdog, and he could be dealt somewhere and land as a bell cow. Or he could hold out. As of now, he's participating in individual drills in practice and seems to be willing to play the good soldier, but it's hard to say if that will last throughout the month. The second man from the Saints passing game we're talking about today is wide receiver Michael Thomas. Thomas keeps checking off boxes in his return from his 19-month absence for his bothersome ankle, participating in team drills for the first time on August 6th. He appears to be well on pace to be ready for week 1, which will be his first action with Jameis Winston, presuming Jameis can play, of course, and a new-look Saints receiving core that also features Chris Olave and Jarvis Landry. Thomas isn't going to have a stranglehold on targets like he once had in a thinner receiving core playing with Drew Brees, but he previously showed an elite ceiling, and he appears to be close to full health once again. After going AWOL in the summer of 2021, Ian Rappaport reported that Thomas could require a second surgery for, quote, a new and separate injury to the same ankle. That report was in late 2021. Per our Dr. Edwin Porras at Fantasy Points, another plausible, though unconfirmed scenario is that an initial tightrope procedure was not a complete success on the ankle. That means if the next logical step would be a more extensive procedure that requires approximately 6 to 9 months of rehab and recovery. If Thomas did have that procedure in late 2021 or early 2022, the timeline adds up to where we are right now, where we believe Thomas is in his recovery. Dr. Porras is now willing to say that he believes Thomas is close to 100%, and after shying away from him for fantasy earlier in the offseason, he is back to buying in on Thomas. There is, of course, the issue of price. His 6th round ADP on Underdog is unlikely to last for long if the positive health reports keep rolling in. In fact, I personally was in an Underdog draft just last night in which Thomas went at the beginning of round 5, ahead of my pick of Rashad Bateman, one of my favorite breakout receivers of the year. It's up to you to decide if you think that's worth paying up for Michael Thomas. At our other wide receiver spot, we head to Indianapolis. Now, we love Michael Pittman. Everybody loves Michael Pittman, and we should. Matt Ryan has supported a fantasy wide receiver 1 in 13 of his 14 NFL seasons. That is true. I am serious. Look it up. 100% effect. But Ryan has also had 24 instances of a wide receiver finishing in the top 35 for fantasy. So there could be room for another receiver here to emerge and contribute to your team. Now, per The Athletic, Zach Kiefer, 2nd-round rookie Alec Pierce has mostly worked with the first-team offense in training camp. The talented wide receiver out of Cincinnati isn't actually the Colt receiver who has been getting the most buzz at camp, though. That's been 4th-year pro Ashton Dolan, who has both a big 6'1 frame and 4.4 340 speed, but also just 18 catches in 3 NFL seasons. But Pierce has been thrown directly into the oven as he's run with the starters throughout the entirety of training camp, unlike Dolan, which has often meant he's been in one-on-one battles with all-pro cornerback Stephon Gilmore. Per Kiefer, quote, Pierce looks exactly like what the Colts believe they drafted in the spring, a smart, speedy, athletic receiver who's ready to go from day one. In April, with Pierce still on the board, Reich envisioned lining him up on the outside opposite Pittman and wondered how defenses would react. And then, of course, the Colts ended up drafting him. It could be slow off the mark for Pierce, but there's opportunity here. Meanwhile, Kiefer said Paris Campbell has had an excellent start to training camp, while Dolan is, quote, not only making the team, but also will have a role in the offense on Sundays. Of course, Campbell was held out of practice Monday with a tight hamstring, but said he'll be back on the field Wednesday, according to Kiefer. An injury to Campbell is unfortunately nothing new, but given his history, it also makes sense for the Colts to be extra cautious with him. In that same Underdog draft I referenced earlier, Dolan went in the 17th round ahead of Paris Campbell. So the hype on Ashton Dolan is rising. Alec Pierce has been consistently a teen round pick on Underdog. That's also fair. It's a wild situation here with these receivers, but there is an opportunity for somebody to get in here and contribute alongside Michael Pittman, who's being fairly drafted in the 3rd round. In our flex spot is an intriguing rookie running back in Houston. Per Cole Thompson of Fansided, who has been at Texans camp, the rookie Dameon Pierce has been the most impressive Texan running back, saying that Friday was, quote, the 3rd day where the gap between him and the other Texan backs was staggering. Now, that doesn't mean the coaches will trust Dameon Pierce with a bell cow role, especially if they think veterans Marlon Mack or Rex Burkhead can be better on passing downs or in terms of protection. But Pierce is by far the most appealing from an upside standpoint, and his 10th round ADP on Underdog is not restrictive. Per our Greg Cosell from our 2022 prospect guide, Pierce is an attitude runner with an urgent, competitive feel to every run, and there is no question that Pierce any given week can be a volume back, But my sense is he could not do that week in and week out given his limitations, unless he was in an offense like the Chargers, where the number one back might get 170 to 190 carries, much in the same way Austin Eckler does. However, there is much more to get from Pierce as a receiver, and that will enhance his value as you project and transition him to the NFL. Now, Pierce was underutilized by a poor coaching staff at Florida, and if he can carve out a role as a receiving back in the NFL, he has the ability to be a really solid fantasy asset. I'm not saying he's going to be Austin Eckler, just that, hey, a target is worth 2.5 times as much as a carry in PPR fantasy. So if Dameon Pierce can carve out that receiving role, that's going to be somebody who is going to contribute to a lot of fantasy teams this year. I'm Joe Dolan, and this has been the Fantasy Points Daily Lineup. Head to fantasypoints.com for all your fantasy draft needs, including the aforementioned prospect guide from Greg Cosell. It is a must for Dynasty and Devy players because it also has Devy profiles from our guy, Wes Huber. And that guide has been discounted 60% to celebrate the start of the NFL season. And if you want to subscribe to fantasypoints.com, use the code LINEUP22 for an extra 10% off any package for the 2022 NFL season. Catch you tomorrow, everyone.